Alright, so 2 hours and 40 minutes later, I have the probably most complicated rubber band gun in the world. The target on the right presents a wider profile. The one on the left is harder to hit. So this is the ROKR Justice Guard minigun kit, and you better budget 2.5 to 3 hours to assemble this guy because it's made up of all these parts and you're putting them together, and there's a lot of complicated mechanisms inside. So when you pull the trigger, you'll see the entire slide moves back and forth, and it has this rotating rubber band gun mechanism. So you essentially can load a rubber band, hook it on there, and then you can advance to the next position and load another rubber band. And so it only has 4 of these little tines that rotate around and connect together. But if you have flexible enough rubber bands, you can actually wrap them around the axle. So in addition to the first 4 rubber bands, you can just keep clicking this guy, and that first rubber band's wrapped around the axle, and you can put more on here. And so I've gotten this thing up to 6 before. I'm going to go to 8 this time. And so it's essentially a semi-automatic repeating rubber band gun. I'm not sure if that's 7 or 8, but I think that's where we're supposed to be stopping. Yeah, that's where we're supposed to stop. And so now every time you pull the trigger, it pulls back and launches rubber band. And so, you know, they include 2 little Army Min targets that you can knock over the Army Min targets, and then basically just fire rubber bands around until you run out of rubber bands. So this is a 14 plus assembly toy. I think you could be less than 14 to play with it, but it's definitely kind of a showpiece because it has multiple layers here. There's inlaid walnut, pins you're putting in, screws you're putting in, kind of some fancy things here, like this slide thing here. You can lock the slide back with that slide lock right there. You know, so there's a lot of little things. There's like the removable magazine. There's nothing in the magazine. It's not, you know, functional, but it is removable. You know, and so it is a very fancy kit just for a rubber band gun kit. It's really more about putting it together and having it when you're done than just being a rubber band gun kit. So I found it relatively easy to assemble. There's lots of parts. They give you a few extra parts for some of the things that you might need extras on. And you know, there's 4 or 5 different springs, and there's screws and pins, and you know, so you do have to follow the instructions. The instructions are very easy to use, but there's a decent number of them because it's basically, you know, front and back of this giant poster here. So there's 4 of these sheets of instructions following to put together. So I've been pretty happy with the instructions, pretty happy with the kit. It went together and worked very well, but it does take some effort to put it together. This is the ROKR Justice Guard. It's a minigun that is made out of wood, and it has apparently 113 parts. It's for adults, it's 14 plus. And essentially you have to assemble this guy yourself. So it's sometimes sold as an adult puzzle, although it does include instructions on how to set everything up. So I was sent this to review for free. It would cost you about $40 if you wanted to buy it yourself. They haven't paid me for this review, and my opinions remain my own. Once you remove the plastic, pull this guy out, and inside the box we have a package also in cellophane that has several layers of laser cut plywood. It looks like some pretty nice plywood that's been laser cut here. We have a pretty large instruction sheet here. So, you know, this is a large booklet with a decent number of steps on how to assemble this rubber band powered gun. And we also have a lot of rubber bands. We have a set of springs and pins and screwdrivers, another couple of things with screws, a little And then these here are little tiny plastic rings, almost washers. And we have some injection molded pieces as well. So it's kind of a mixed media puzzle project, build it yourself gun, primarily laser cut flat wood pieces, but they do have some mechanical bits out of plastic, and then various springs and screws, and they include a screwdriver and lots of rubber bands. All right, we're starting at 4:10 p.m. Let's see how long this takes. Okay, so in addition to the pieces in laser cut wood, we have bag 1, which has just about all the teeny little parts. Bag 2, 100 rubber bands. We have a shaft sleeve bag in wax separately. There's bag 3 with these 2 parts. And then board F is the injection molded screwed plastic pieces. Although not called out in the instructions, there is a bit of sandpaper in with the wooden laser cut boards. All parts on the wood are labeled. This is, for example, A, B, C, D, and E. Okay, so there's 3 easy steps. Step 1 starts here. Step 2 starts there. Continues to the next page. Step 3 starts here. Continues to the next page. So the first few pieces of wood snap out pretty easily. They do have a tiny little spot that you'll have to sand down. The B section of wood is thicker than all the other bits of wood. So the first thing you assemble is this guy. It's made out of a thin piece here, a thick piece, and a thin piece that goes on top with this piece in the middle that holds everything together. Tolerances are pretty good here because that piece that was edge-on is perfectly flush with these 2 pieces of wood. So that means the thicknesses of these woods are, very precise, and the size of that piece that was cut perfectly matches those. Some pieces are cut out of other pieces, and so the instructions say, hey, save this inner bit, use it later. Right, so we have one of these main units here with a whole bunch of pegs in it, and then this guy goes on top of it through various peg holes, I believe like that. Alright, I got to the first part I needed to wax. The little wax thing here has a RoboTime text embedded into the mold for the wax. Okay, we have our first moving part, which is made by sandwiching 3 pieces of wood, and it basically holds itself in place there as it slides back and forth because this front piece of wood sandwiches on to this side and the back piece of wood sandwiches on to the other side. I've got to the part with the plastic components, and you can break them out of the sprue by hand, but it leaves behind little nibs. So I recommend cutting them out with something like a side cutter and also getting yourself a little flat file to file any remnants down. Alright, there's a lot of spring options here. It says not the black spring, or maybe it is the black spring and not the silver spring. So there's 2 black springs, and it has a check mark next to the black spring. And it says this is 1:1 10 millimeters, so I think it's one of these 2 black springs, and it's not supposed to be these silver springs. There's also some bigger silver springs, but since it's black, it's the right size, I'm going to use it. As an example of why you should always read ahead, get all this stuff finicky put together with your fingers holding the spring in place, and then suddenly realize you need part F5 to snap in place. So when you're done, this little notch sticks out this way, this guy bends that way, and it springs up and down. So in case you missed that it's a black spring, after you follow the instructions to screw it all together, you're supposed to check and make sure it's a black spring. Alright, there's two larger springs to choose from here. I think it's the smaller of the larger two, judging by this 1-to-1 printed, sizing guide. So I think it's this guy. It also seems to fit the best in there. Right, there's a lot of pegs you have to get D4 to go over to set it down on top of the rest of this assembly. So I found I had to wiggle some of these pegs forward backwards to get them to line up with the holes. But once you get it on, it makes a solid piece of wood with this trigger mechanism kind of sandwiched in between spring-loaded. Okay, we have the first page of instructions finished. Okay, we're at the spot where we need this tool we made on the first page. Apparently it's used to drive, I think, these little plastic or rubber washers down over posts, and we need the 15mm post, not the 20mm post. So you're putting two of these on and then sticking it into this mechanism you built. Alright, the shorter of these two silver rods is the shaft here, and these shaft sleeves are going over it. So you could get those little sleeves over the shaft without the tool, but the tool makes it easier. Alright, so this was a relatively intricate mechanism here. Of course, that intricate mechanism sits on top of this intricate mechanism. Alright, this little slide catch here is made up of no less than 4 tiny little pieces of wood that you have to snap together, put that screw in to hold in place, and it basically clips up and down like that. Alright, finally we get to use the largest spring in the bag. So they do a good job of using, back side or front side to tell you if the laser engraving matters, which way it goes. The only time I found that they didn't do that, and I needed it, was on C18, which is mostly hidden behind C16 here. I could just see the C18 engraving just a little bit, so I had to turn the C18 around backwards to hide the C18 numbers. You could barely see it, but it wasn't fully hidden behind this guy. Alright, we'll use the tool again to drive these two golden pins in. Alright, this thing is starting to come together. Alright, we're done with the second page of instructions, and we only have 1 3/4 more. So halfway through the instructions, we've been working for about an hour and a half. So it says, be careful when you're folding this living hinge over. Don't break it. Alright, here's another one of those warnings because this living hinge part is fragile. So you stick it on, snap it on, fold it over, hook all these pieces in, and they only give you one of these, so if you break it, well, just a little unnerving. I recommend when you do this that you attach this guy here first, because this part has to bend down more than that part. So those guys want to go in, but I recommend putting this one in first and then everything else kind of lines up. And I made my first real mistake, didn't pay enough attention to the directions here. We're supposed to put these nice decorative wooden plates over the slide and then push these little metal pins in. So I think I'll be able to pull these pins out just by pulling out on the pieces of wood here. The danger is that I might break something while I'm pushing it in and back out again. Glad I have my side nippers here because that made pulling this guy out a lot easier than it could have been. Alright, that looks a little better. And what has to be the most finicky bit of the whole project, you have all these tiny little slats which go into all of those tiny little slots, and it looks like the last two are a little bit different from all the others. Also note that the left hand and right hand side are symmetrical but opposite and mirrored. Now, just like all the other ones where they say something like E11 plus, that means they have an extra part there in case you break one of them. Alright, that was not as fiddly and horrible as I thought it was going to be. And it is worth the appearance, I guess. And we've finished the third page of instructions. Getting close here. Alright, with E1 and D8, you can almost, but not quite, put these guys on backwards because those two spots there line up to these things here, almost with those guys. But paying attention to the instructions, they're supposed to go that way. Alright, we've broken into the bag of 5mm pins to put these two decorative side plates on the handle. They go into these two holes here. And so now we have these 4 decorative pieces in a different type of wood, maybe it's walnut, and as far as I can tell they just press fit in here. Yeah, so that just press fitted in there. When not too difficult, but it's definitely not coming out. You know, it's definitely held in by friction. So that's starting to look pretty darn nice there. So the clip here just fits into the bottom. It never needs to come out because it's not used for operation at all. But if you want to be able to get it out, make sure you put a lot of wax on that guy because it fits in there and snaps in pretty good. It's hard to get out without a lot of wax on it. And for safety, the last step is to put the orange barrel indicator on the tip. And you have a few of these army men left over in the walnut wood there for targets. Alright, so 2 hours and 40 minutes later, I have the probably most complicated rubber band gun in the world. The target on the right presents a wider profile. The one on the left is harder to hit.